Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Careers 2030 UpBrainery's podcast webinar that talks about, the future of education, what is really needed in the education space in order to prepare our future generation to be able to take on the workforce of tomorrow. And we love to get amazing people together at every webinar and be able to bring in educators, bring in policymakers and community leaders in order to really have a great conversation and just kind of see where it goes. So I'm going to pass it on to Takidra, who's my co-host for this webinar. And we have amazing guests, and they will introduce themselves.
Thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Takidra Pierre. I am a global strategic partnership consultant and so happy to be here with amazing company. And I love the fact that I know everyone or have met everyone on this panel. So I'm really interested to hear this conversation that we're going to have about communities. So first, why doesn't everyone introduce themselves? John, do you want to start?
I'd be happy to. Good morning, all. My name is John Lambert. I'm the CEO of the Cannon. I'm not sure who knows who the Cannon is and who doesn't, but we are a startup community development organization that has been in the Houston market for about 5 years. And we're making our way beyond the borders of the Houston metro area to other places in Texas and hopefully other places around the world moving forward. So just doing everything we can to help the entrepreneurial community and anybody that wants to be an entrepreneur in the future. And I think that'll be the bridge to our conversation today related to kind of future careers education and how we provide the best pathways for our students.
Right. Melissa?
Yeah. My name is Melissa Gonzalez. I am the Director of Programming for Houston Exponential. And like the Cannon, we are passionate about growing the innovation ecosystem in Houston and surrounding areas. So really excited to be here and chat with you all.
And Dr. Mayberry.
Good morning, Dr. Norman known as the Talk Doc. I media division around the world. You guys hear an echo?
Yes.
Not really.
We did there for a second, yeah.
Yeah, but not anymore.
Okay. Okay, great. So I am a toxicologist and medical scientist. I'm also the Chief Science Officer for UpBrainery. My passion is promoting STEM, women's leadership, and working with educational organizations, K through 12 and higher education, in terms of advancing research, not just STEM research, but research across the board, and advancing innovation as well, increasing minority participation, communities of color, getting them integrated, dismantling silos. I am a founder of a nonprofit, Nicole's Garden, where we use high fidelity and low fidelity technology in order to create green spaces for people who don't have access to a lot of grass to create a traditional garden. So we use space gardening techniques. I am a former NASA scientist. I was the world's first space toxicologist when I started at NASA in 2004.
Okay.
So enough about me.
Great. So excited to have all of you on our panel, and thank you for taking the time to be here. This is really exciting because recently I was just actually asked a question as to how UpBrainery, really keeps up with the future of jobs. How do we put together the content and not knowing what the jobs of the future may be? So I would really love to be able to throw that question out there is how as a community, first of all, how do we define community? And second of all, how as a community, we actually look out for what is the future workforce that we need to be preparing. So I'll start with John. John, if you want to go ahead and answer that question.
Yeah, so from our perspective, so much of what we focus on in the entrepreneurial space is innovation focused, and innovation is about the future, right? It's about improving on where we're at today at the technical level, all the way up through, kind of future industry and careers. And so the benefit that we have from a community perspective in terms of contributing to this is that we've got a window into what's coming. We've got a window into not only the startup companies, but the corporate entities and government entities that those startups are working to support. And the value of the community dimension to that is that if we were developing those things in a silo, we would probably come up with some pretty cool solutions, but we wouldn't be satisfying kind of the supply and demand component of that. We have to really be sure that what we're developing is a true need. And so starting with the demand end of the stick, what's there, listening to the organizations that are going to create those jobs, and as well as the industries that may not need corporations to generate opportunities, but will create jobs, and then take that information back in to say, how do we fill this gap between what's currently provided in the school system structure through tremendous investment in career and technical education and those functions. How do we bridge that gap away from a traditional model that says, I need to go to a 4-year institution or even a vocational school, to how do I segment my training and education in a way that directs me and points me toward the opportunity to fulfill a role or opportunity that I can create a career out of. And so the community component really is the input, the data input to what should we be focusing on in terms of programming content, and then how do we best position that transition of student into industry. That's one of the things that Canon really is passionate about, is every opportunity we can find to bridge educational academic opportunity into commercial business where you've got kind of this real world application. We're looking to do that. So I think the community key is the data we have available from the different partners that are part of our ecosystem.
Absolutely. And it sounds like, that whole conversation that we're having today about stronger communities, building stronger students, having that bridge and that communication between the educational partners as well as the community partners allows the educational partners to be able to leverage the support from the community. So Melissa, is that something that at Houston Exponential, is that what you guys are working on, and how is that, how does that play into the educational ecosystem?
Yeah, and very well said, John. I back it all 100%. But yes, Ghazal, at Houston Exponential, we're looking to close that gap by working with different counties and schools, and just kind of putting out the idea of entrepreneurship at an earlier age for lots of students. And that goes into all kinds of different programming, and not even, I know this is all education, but even for the folks who've been in, at their engineering jobs for 10 years and are looking to make a jump into the idea that they've had on the back of their napkin for all of these years, being able to provide resources for them as well to bridge the gap of knowledge that they don't currently have. And in my work at U of H, at the University of Houston, it's all about experiential learning. So being able, like working with all of the different STEM practices, but on a business level, is extremely important. So Houston Exponential is trying to provide all of the programming and resources that are needed for folks all around the Houston and surrounding areas. So, yeah.
Okay, great. And Dr. Mayberry, I know that you, even with, when you were at NASA and before that and after that, you have been very much of a community builder. And I would love to hear what community means to you and how that actually, goes into your work with your nonprofit as well as working with the schools.
So I'll say this, from an educational standpoint, community really starts with the educational leaders and kind of dismantling what they've been doing for so long. I'll say this, that business is the foundation of every subject, and it should be presented in such a way that everyone needs to know something about operating a business, managing finances. I can tell you there are so many people in STEM that have 2, 3, 4 degrees like me, but when it comes to the basics of operating a business and managing others, they fall short, they struggle, they're highly intelligent, highly intellectual. We put so much focus from the educational standpoint in STEM. We want to be the leaders in STEM, but we forget about the whole person. And that's why a lot of people in STEM get burned out. And when they do have that idea on the napkin, it stays on the napkin. And that's what stops innovation, because they don't know how to convert into becoming a business leader. And while you can get that education later on in life, it's not as strong as having a good foundation within the schools. Every time I talk to someone who plans on going to college, a group, a high school group, a middle school group, I say, hey, I don't care what your major is, try to minor in business or try to take 2 or 3 classes in business, because you're going to be so grateful for that later on in life, because you really need that foundation. So when I talk about community, for education, they need to bring in people in all industries across the board. They need to, think about the fact that not everybody is going to be going to college. I think John mentioned that earlier, but a lot of people are, more mechanical. A lot of people have talents and skills. I don't care if it's doing hair. You need to know how to operate a business. Whatever service you provide, be it a technical service, be it an intellectual service, be it, just a physical service, you need to know how to manage yourself, manage your time, manage finances, work, and manage other people. And it just makes you just so much happier in terms of not having all the frustrations later on in life. I can't tell you how many people in the federal government don't know how to communicate with higher management, because the decision makers have business backgrounds and they're engineers. They can't talk to the scientists because they don't know how to communicate in terms that are more broad than A plus B, whereas scientists think in the shades of gray. So, community starts with communication. And that means, again, communicating with leaders in all types of industry. And when we would put together a team to set a new standard, I'm going to go back to STEM now. We didn't just work with people within the federal government. We didn't just work with people in higher education. We worked with people in private industry. We worked with experts from around the world. And if we just started to do that on the educational level, starting in second or third grade, really introducing kids more to the idea of, success does not just mean how much money you make. Success does not mean just being a doctor or a lawyer or something that sounds prestigious. Success means being happy and fulfilled and providing whatever kind of service you want in your life, whatever that is. It's an artist, it's an engineer, doesn't matter what it is, but that's community to me. It's just being holistic. I know some people don't like the term holistic, but holistic is just such a key term when you're thinking about building a community. You got to be holistic with it.
Oh, that's amazing. Takitra, I know you have some burning questions. I do too, but I'm going to hold back and I'm going to let you have a chance to ask yours.
Well, I just really, really appreciate the conversation and the comments because my 20 plus years or so in education and previously in healthcare, I have been beyond passionate about bringing real world application into secondary education. I live and breathe career and technical education on any campus that I've ever worked at, whether that's secondary or higher ed. And I work really hard to kind of get rid of those misconceptions. So talk to doc, like you just said, that global perspective, bringing in different people from different organizations into schools, that's what needs to happen. It should have happened 30, 40 years ago. However, education is the slowest machine on the planet, especially when it comes to change and adaptation and innovation. And so I think this conversation is a great catalyst for other conversations to happen, because a lot of educational leaders studied education. They didn't study business. They didn't study STEM. They may have started out as an elementary teacher or a high school teacher, and then kind of went to a counselor or an AP, and then they become a principal and superintendent. I'm from a different perspective with a different background. So I have both education and STEM degrees. However, I did an alternative certification program and taught CTE health science. And what I really appreciated about CTE is that everyone comes from industry. So we get it. We've come from structure. We've come from hands-on practical application, and we bring that into the schools. The challenge is that the STEM teachers or the English, history, did not understand why. Why do you want to come into my class and show medical math? Like, this is math. We're just talking about math. Why do we need to incorporate a lesson that includes medical math? Or from a historical perspective, thinking about, medicinal history. So I really appreciate this conversation, because I think that the pandemic has shown us that learning can adapt and things can be done differently. And so everything that you guys said about community and bringing in people who are experts in their fields, whether that's education or something else, everyone has something to contribute to the table. And so when we strengthen those partnerships and those bonds and add that to what's happening in schools, it's a win-win situation. And that holistic approach, I love the holistic approach. You must treat the whole student, just like you should treat the whole patient, you should treat the whole student. And so that's from physical health and wellness, it's from their academic health and wellness, it's giving them the soft skills and the entrepreneurial mindset. It's not about every student starting a business, but every student should have that concept of, wow, I have an idea, so that it doesn't stay on the napkin or the sticky note or bottom of a shoe, wherever it is. So I do want to ask Melissa, because I know Houston Exponential creates, massive programs for entrepreneurs. There's always sessions going on. There's always a way to pull that ecosystem together. How do you at Houston Exponential strengthen that community with so many different people from so many different industries coming together to ideate and create? Like, how do you keep that community and ecosystem together? And then John, you can answer the same question about the Canon.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's about surrounding ourselves with people who are passionate, who have the same passions that we do. Being able to pull in people from, like you said, all different industries, all different backgrounds as mentors and coaches, or to sit on panels, or to, go into schools or help us provide programming, put on programming, It really is all about just surrounding yourself with passionate people. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of that so far. And then community builds community. So it's all about who you know, right? And so, yeah, just bringing everyone together as often as we can, and providing true value for people whenever they're there. Not just, throwing something just to throw it, but making sure that there's a reason and a good topic to cover, and that the room is filled with, like I said, passionate people is important. And then bringing together startup founders as much as possible, because the world of entrepreneurship, as we all know, can be very lonely. And I think that's it's more how it used to be than it is now, because of the different organizations that are in our ecosystem, like the Canon, like, Houston Exponential and Born Global, and all of those communities, bringing entrepreneurs and founders together to share their struggles from the beginning, I think is incredibly special, and something that we're excited to do as often as we can.
And I'll just jump in on top of that. Again, reciprocating, Melissa, agree completely with everything you said. In our world, and from the outside looking in, a lot of people look at entrepreneurship as somebody's trying to make a buck, right? And that's certainly part of it. But the reality of entrepreneurship is it's problem solving. It's how do we resolve and address an issue that needs to get fixed. And a lot of times in the innovation space, that's how can we save us time so that we can use that time to do something else. And so really for our community, the focus is that being one part of it. And then the second piece is how do we make the world a better place? What kind of social impact can we make to, the overall community as we're going through this process? We talk through with all of the companies that are part of our community, we absolutely want you to be wildly successful on the financial side. But we also want you to come out of this understanding what your responsibility is in terms of giving back to the community and making the world a better place. And so as Takidra made a tremendous point around the pace in the current educational system structure. I think we've got this issue where we've got a widening gap between the pace of education change, and that there's tremendous things happening there. The kind of the advent of CTE and the investment and the identification of, hey, there needs to be a broader conversation than traditional 2-year, 4-year degree programming, and CTE is a great step toward doing that. And the limited resources available there just make the pace of the growth of that, the value of those programs so slow in regard to the pace of change on the business side, on the corporate side. And so, being in Houston, we're all familiar with kind of what's happening from a space perspective, just the concept of the commercialization of space and the idea that there are going to be jobs and future roles as we think about Careers 2030. There are going to be roles that nobody ever even envisioned, and none of the educational system end to end has any ability to address those roles today. And even if we identified 10 new roles today, the pace at which those systems can change in order to adapt to that is going to be limited. And so we've got this chasm in between. And so this concept of what can the community has to fill that gap. We have to come up with alternative solutions that will allow for a student to progress through, while the educational systems kind of come along for the ride and ultimately kind of meet those needs, there has to be interim solutions to do that. And so our community really is about that innovation piece and, how do we make sure that we're addressing the need that's out there in the gap.
Yeah, I was going to just jump in. Sorry, Takidra, but I was going to jump in because, again, this is like so close to our heart and what UpBrainery does. And this kind of ties directly into the question I was asking earlier, which is, we were asked, you are in this space where you're providing career technical education to middle and high school students and, and getting them ready for the jobs of future. But how do you stay in step with what are the jobs of the future? What are the new technologies that we should be teaching? So what you just, Melissa and John, both of you talked about is exactly the type of communications and the open conversations that need to be happening on a daily basis with education, saying, look, one of the things, for example, last year we were talking about there are several companies that have privatized, or they're on their way to privatize space travel. How are we keeping up with even the infrastructure jobs? Forget the astronauts and the engineers and things like that, but there's a whole lot of other jobs that are going to be needed, which requires infrastructure to be built. You can't have 4 companies just launching rockets, without some sort of an infrastructure. But now, today, the conversation is about air taxis. And that entire infrastructure that needs to be built in air for these air taxis that are actually starting to deploy now. So the jobs are changing on a continuous basis. And the problem that Takidra, you talked about is before how education is a slow moving vehicle. And that's unfortunate because you have textbooks that get published, and takes about a year or 2 to get them even published. Then you have them in circulation for 10, 15, 20 years. That whole, it's not just about identifying the jobs of the future. It's not about just having the conversations, but what are the tools that we need in order to make those changes and bring the communities and the educational ecosystems closer in sync. And I'm going to now and let Noreen go ahead and answer that as well. Sorry, I kind of jumped in, but I was just so passionate about this whole conversation that I can't help myself. So I want to hear from you as well, Noreen.
Now?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So, the one thing that I think that a lot of industries are falling short in is the supply of critical thinkers. And education has really missed the mark in developing and fostering critical thinking skills in students. This is an issue that not just the federal government has, but again, cross-cutting across industries. People don't know how to think critically, and it causes stagnation. It also creates the silos because people just want to focus on their one task and they don't want to have to communicate with anyone else. When you build up those silos, then again, productivity slows down, profitability decreases, and you have accidents. You talk about space travel, but space travel is hard. Space taxis, it's kind of unrealistic. There's a reason that back when I first, got to NASA 17 years ago, I was working on privatized space travel then. They were ignoring a lot of the issues because they couldn't think critically past, we're just going to build this and send it up. They didn't realize when you open a hatch and you release all those chemicals, you're going to kill the crew. You don't open a window in space. So every kind of chemical that's coming off all of those materials are going to, cause issues for the astronauts. The Artemis launch that just, was postponed. I knew that was going to happen. I pretty much predicted it. A lot of us were worried about it because space is hard. And that's the one thing that, the federal government experts, they're not able to necessarily communicate that to industry as well when they try to privatize, things that we do. I mean, you can privatize air travel. Air travel is much easier, around the world. That's why you have the FAA that still controls it. But when you're talking about like a NASA, you're talking about sending people to other asteroids just on low Earth LEO level, 70 miles above the Earth and back. That's easier because you're not there so long. But at the same time, you're in a very different environment. If you don't know how to control that environment correctly, if you don't know how to ensure that space vibration doesn't cause the components to break, you're going to have a nightmare. So critical thinking skills, that's kind of a long answer. I just want to say that critical thinking is something that education has to do more of. And it causes us to be a better society, more compassionate, more being able to relate to people who don't necessarily look like us, and to have more respect for people in terms of their intellectual capacity, based upon not upon the way they look, but what they're actually bringing to the table. This is a long time coming. And another thing is industries want people that can look around the corner to the next problem. You can't do that if you're not a critical thinker. And education is also, it's being abandoned by a lot of people. YouTube is taking over. There's a new educational industry. It's called YouTube University. And a lot of people are learning business. A lot of people are learning entrepreneurship. A lot of people are learning how to do all kinds of things on YouTube. And they're just saying, I don't need to go to college anymore. Or, my high school never taught me about this. And so when you brought up medical math earlier, Takedra, I was like, thank you. People want job-ready skills. And again, not everybody's going to college, so you got to give them some job-ready skills starting in middle school. So I don't know if that was an answer to your question, Ghazal, but I just was going back to Takedra's question because I was just ready to, talk about that, because it's just, Melissa said passion, John said solving problems. Both of those, when a person is able to do that, they're so fulfilled. And when you have a fulfilled person, you have a better employee, you have a better owner, you just have a better life altogether. Again, goes back to, the holistic thinking.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, so Takedra and I had these written out questions, right? But this conversation has just been so exciting and insightful and just kind of flowing very organically that I'm just loving it. So I think our questions have kind of gone out the window. So we're just going with the with just the flow of this conversation.
Melissa, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in quickly because Dr. Noreen hit the nail on the head with critical thinking, and going back to my point earlier about experiential learning, I really think those hands-on activities, whether it be STEM or popping up a lemonade stand or whatever it is in middle school and high school, just being able to provide those experiential learning experiences for students, I think allows for critical thinking in a way that whatever test you're taking, asking a question and asking for a short answer response is not going to get you. It's about doing things with your hands, learning, solving problems. And, at the University of Houston, we do a big event called Wolf Fest, and it's a 3-day pop-up food festival, basically. The students plan for it for 6 months in advance. They have to go out, they have to find sponsors, they have to build sponsorship packets, they have to literally everything from the back end, technically fundraising side to day of, hey, my line's too long, people aren't getting through here fast enough, oh, my credit card machine isn't working, what do I do now? Oh, there's a fire, an actual fire, do we have a fire extinguisher? All of those things, but making those students that much sharper and more prepared to just solve problems. And like you said, Dr. Noreen, looking around the corner to make sure that they're a step ahead and really giving them those critical thinking skills. So be it starting in, really, I think it should start in kindergarten. Let's pop up that lemonade stand. Let's teach the kids something to do with their hands and get those brains moving. So
I think there's as an input to that as well. And when we look at, and this is self-serving a little bit from the entrepreneurship side of things, but I think it feeds into everything we're talking about, that if we went out of our way to create leadership opportunities for kids at an earlier stage, and if you look at the demographic of who becomes an entrepreneur, the number one, the highest percentage category are kids who have parents who are entrepreneurs, right? That they watched their parents go through that journey. But then short of that, and not all of us have been blessed with that opportunity. I had a hardworking school teacher dad that did 3 other jobs, and my mom just tried to keep track of us kids while we were going. And so, I didn't see entrepreneurship growing up, but I was given the opportunity. And part of this is personality based. Not every kid is kind of prone to do this, but I think we can kind of create, as part of that experience, opportunities for leadership, because I think that leads directly to when I'm in a position of decision making, and those can be curated, they can be created. That critical thinking capability actually comes out of the opportunity to do that. We have so many kids that kind of coast through as, well, they're not the loudest talker, they're not always raising their hand, but nobody's reaching out and saying, okay, we're going to put you in a role where you're driving this ship. And let them go through that experience and that process. And I think we're investing in building all of the, I wouldn't call them soft skills, but really just core competency capabilities before you even touch curriculum, anything to do with the coursework piece. You're creating an individual that is equipped to make good decisions moving forward. And that is going to benefit them, not only from a business perspective, but all I cared about with my kids as they went through school was, I don't care what you learn. I want you to come out of this process being able to make good decisions for yourself, because I'm not going to be there to help you do that on a day-to-day basis going forward. And so that's really where I want you to land. And so I think if we invested more in that component as an input to their future success, I think we solve a bunch of the career challenge stuff by having a student that can kind of drive things for themselves in the future.
And John, that's such a great point, because one of the parts of community partnerships with schools is also providing live experiential, opportunities for students, whether they're in high school
Absolutely.
or in college and whatnot. And I'll give you from personal, example. With UpBrainery, we've always had interns, and we've always invested in high school interns. And it's really interesting because they come to you very green, very unsure, very much, they know academics, but they have no idea how to live in a real life corporate environment, or to be able to really make some decisions. And it's a learning opportunity for us as well, because by the time they start and by the time they end, our job is to really help them with some of these skills. That's what we need to help provide them. And it would be really cool if that could be incorporated within the schools itself and things like that. But I'll give you an example. I mean, just recently, this past semester, we had an intern that I was very, very happy with their, intelligence, with their approach to work. But I always felt that they weren't sure of themselves. So, one thing we had to do, pull her out, say, you know what, this project is very important to UpBrainery, and you and the group of 5 interns are going to be reporting to you. You're the project manager. The shaking and the nervousness at the end of 6 weeks, all gone, and emerged a very, very sure of herself young lady that I'd be proud to have in any job capacity. So I think as a community,
opportunities to kind of create controlled environments. We're not obviously going to put somebody in charge of launching Artemis 1, but we can put them into roles that, although maybe at this point that is not necessarily bad. I'm not being critical of anyone. It's just, and that whole process has been interesting. But yeah, I think we can create those opportunities and protect the kids that need a little bit of extra support moving through that process. And I think we come out of the other end of that with, I think the other thing we have to do is kind of transitioning a little bit around thinking about the way students today think about career and career path, right? Most of they live in I finally admitted this. I'm way older than the kids that are out there today, and that's just continues to be worse and worse, but they think differently than we did coming out of school. When I say we, my generation, around career path. It never crossed my mind to be a content creator, because there was no internet or anything like that. And so the world today is an entirely different place. And so I think that as we think through the way they view opportunities, the gig economy is new since we were all going through this process, and that it has a kind of a reputation a little bit, and is pigeonholed around food delivery or ride share drivers. But there's this whole concept of gig that really segments a whole bunch of other career paths that even in the tech space, right? We can look at segmenting development skills in a much smaller package, and somebody can be really a niche provider very quickly in real industry with the right tools and training to get them through that process. And so as we kind of as a community embrace the thought process, let's think from the perspective of the student coming out and kind of how they view that process, and then give them the options that would that kind of satisfy what they're looking for. I think that's why CTE was created, was to provide just this broad exposure to, here's all the things that are out there that you could do that aren't doctor, lawyer, or teacher, or whatever, graduating from a 4-year program. I think we can actually take that to the next level within that GAP community around, here's some other ideas that will help satisfy kind of a career path idea.
So John, my dissertation is on experiential learning and CTE. So you're right. We could talk for hours about the origin of CTE, vocational education, why it was created, who it was created for. That has transitioned over time and changed. And so I'm so glad this session is recorded, because there are so many sub-conversations to dissect. All of us on this call, we're all futurists. We think about tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Education as a whole doesn't necessarily do that. Right. And the budgeting cycle for education does not do that. And if you've ever dealt with education from a budgeting perspective, or getting something paid for, ordered, it's a long process. It is not like in business where you have a need, you do a needs analysis, you create something, here it is, you take it to the team, and they say, okay, yes, we have the funding, or we don't. Education can take years to get simple funding for things that are critical for these students. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Noreen, you talked about critical thinking. Melissa, you talked about critical thinking, but that futurist thinking, that thinking past this moment, I think is another thing that is so unique to these generations of students, because they're immersed in entrepreneurship, even if they don't call it that, if they don't see that.
That's absolutely
Instagrams,
right.
The Twitters, the TikTok, the content creators, all of those are entrepreneurs. They're doing their own thing. They're carving their own path. They're making their own way. And students now, even those that want to be doctors, lawyers, kind of the traditional, heavy education career paths, are thinking, okay, I'll take this medical degree, but I really want to create a new product or a new solution, surgical solution, or a new something. And so given that we're the futurists, and that we think about things, taking pieces from the past, utilizing the present, applying that to what's happening next, how can schools partner with Houston Exponential, with the Canon, with NASA, with these entities? And I'm the experiential learning expert. This is what I do. I go into companies, I find out what they're doing, how they operate, and I take that back to educational institutions and say, this is what you should teach. So that's great, the curriculum, all that's beautiful, but here's what's happening in industry. And this is what they need from students coming out of high school or from college. So how can schools, if there are futurists, which there are, futurists on school campuses within districts, how can they partner with organizations and companies and entrepreneurs to strengthen that bond within community and make sure that those students are best prepared for the careers of 2030 and beyond?
I think it starts with the freedom to be able to do that to begin with. I think that a lot of teachers, a lot of principals, a lot of administrators are stuck in what they're required to do, and they're not able to create those partnerships. They can't carve out the time because they're teaching for a test, or you're in an AP class and you're more focused on an AP exam to try to bypass a college class than you are on really getting into the advanced curriculum. I can tell you that, within the federal government, that's not the model that you want to go to in terms of futurist thinking, because every few years or every 8 years, there's a new president, and the things that you work on sometimes just get tossed out the window when you get a new administrator that might be a political appointee with zero experience in your industry. When I first got into NASA, I'll tell you, I looked on the wall and there was a plan to go back to the moon by 1990. I walked in 2004. You're still not close to going back to the moon. I helped set the standards for air quality and water quality for going to the moon and Mars, and that was way back in 2011 to 2013. We're in 2022. So I'll say this. When you want to partner with someone, I would start with private industry, and I would start with a small business entrepreneur. They have the most flexibility. They have the most freedom to speak to you openly without fear of retribution or getting in trouble. So, when I talk to people, I don't speak for the government, but I will tell you that, what I did outside the government, which I had to get approval for, I had so much freedom and there was so much more fulfillment there. So, if you want to partner with, businesses, start with the mid-sized to smaller businesses. See if they have time. Look for those large companies that do have a division or funding set aside for partnering with education. Because when you look at the large businesses, they essentially want those career-ready skills, like you talked about. How do you do medical math? Or I want someone that can come in and look at globalization of this product for me. Do they have some experience with that? I need people that I can train to work with the European Union on their standards versus Canadian standards versus American standards, for whatever it is. So I would say start on that path. But if you have an educational system where you can't do that, you're locked in by, administration, it's going to be very frustrating. And I think that's where the birth of charter schools have come from. I think that's why so many people are turning away again from YouTube. And futurist thinking is that, they want people that can look around the corner, but if you don't, if you're not teaching them how to do that. So I think you've got the decision makers in education that can have an open mind to these conversations and say, you know what, we do want to have the best students, best prepared students on the planet. We shouldn't be, number 13 in engineering worldwide. We should be, top 3, if not number 1. There are things that you can do if you're not so locked into just doing things the way that they always have been. So there's, if you can, having these conversations again with the decision makers, with the teachers, I think that opens up so much. Like, Takidra, if you spoke to the teacher beforehand and said, hey, this is why we're going to bring in someone to talk about medical math, they may have given you less, pushback. So I think, communication is the key to everything. But I definitely want to hear from the others on the panel, but that's just my 2 cents. I would not start with the federal government.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and I have the luxury of having started out as a high school math teacher. So I lived the education world for a little bit of time, enjoyed it for the period of time that I did it. But institutional education doesn't change, and this is true of any change, until the rewards and incentives model changes. And today, until we decide that we're going to incent creating students that fit into roles that the universe needs them to fill, and stay focused on test scores, you're not going to get that to move fast enough. And so, from the Canon's perspective, our real role and our passion is around identifying not necessarily the entrepreneurs of today, although that's certainly possible, but our investment in education is really around investing in the folks that are going to be the entrepreneurs that are going to kind of fuel our community in the future. And so all of the work that we're doing, we got a great relationship with Spring Branch ISD. We have a number of relationships with private schools. Had a great meeting up in Dallas with Frisco ISD, who's doing some tremendous things in the innovation and entrepreneurship space. Really what we're working to do there is create that bridge between what's happening in those CTE programs and entrepreneurship programs and what's happening in the real world with not only the small businesses that make up our community, but the corporate partners that are part of that. I've been pleasantly surprised around some of the autonomy that the CTE teachers have been given to kind of create opportunities in that world. It's not, most of what you run into from a curriculum perspective is we got to put that through Austin. Austin has to bless this. In the CTE world, it's a little bit more like the Wild West. Get me what I need to get the value to these students as part of this process. And so we're looking for ways to embed as much as we can in terms of value into that process. And through the programming and the companies that are part of the Canon and just be the best partners we can, get them out of the classroom where we possibly can, get them into an environment like one of our working environments where they can interact with CEOs and operators and engineers and developers so that they can see kind of what's happening and get real world experience.
I just want to,
and that's exactly what I was going to say as well, is get them out of the classroom. And because we know that the processes and procedures are slow moving in the education space, I say put it in the hands of the students, put the opportunities out there, maybe allow them to get class credit or extra credit for attending, some of the Houston Exponential events or Canon events, where they get exposure to, like John said, the CEOs and founders and see other things that are happening, and just, give them that exposure since it's not going to happen in the traditional curriculum.
So Melissa, I'm going to add that because you mentioned WolfFest, and WolfFest is a phenomenal event that is great to, to me, it's a one-stop shop. And so I've taken students to WolfFest before, and it is a nice mix of not just the WCE or Wolf Center for Entrepreneurship students, but then also the CEOs, the startup founders, the people who come out and support WolfFest, whether they're alumni or otherwise. It's a great way to see how everything is connected and what it really takes to start a business. And that's putting students directly into that position. And so getting them out of the classroom, getting them out of the textbooks, getting them off of the computer where they're learning all of that theory and knowledge, but the practical application comes in and they can see how the community comes together to support businesses, to help develop ideas, to fuel that growth into the future. That's what they should see. And that's what CTE does. That's what UpBrainery does. NASA has, countless programs that help to facilitate students learning outside of the classroom. And so the more that we can do that, and the more that we can show students the real value of why they're learning math, why are they learning English, why are they learning history, versus the standard of you need this credit to graduate. You need this, you need English, or you need 4 years of science, or you need whatever it is to graduate. But why? Why do I need to know this? How is this going to help me figure out what I want to do? Because a lot of them don't know what to do. And so, students that may hear this session, parents that may hear this session, I think, letting students take control of that conversation and letting them talk through what they're seeing on social media, even, with the content creating and the graphic design and all of the businesses that, I can design shoes, I do hair, I do nails and lashes and all these other things that are happening, putting a name or a term on what these students are doing, giving them the decision-making skills, giving them the leadership skills, all of that ties into the conversations that we're having to prepare them for the careers of 2030, but then also strengthening community ties. Because with the progression of social media, it does take away students from that sense of community, that sense of probably how we all might have grown up with going outside and talking to people and going places. There are some students who would rather watch a basketball game online than to go to the stadium at their university and see the basketball game, because there's just how they're used to functioning in this current environment. And so how do we change that? How do we get them to see the value of showing up and being in person? So I know we have about 8 minutes or so left. I do want to, Ghazal, if you have any points before I kind of throw the final words of wisdom question out there, because I know everyone has something that they could share with students or with educators or parents about how we can strengthen community relationships. But do you want to throw something out there before we hear final words?
Yeah, real quick, so I can leave some time for everybody else to answer the last question. But one of the things I think we need to all collectively as a society, from the education side, from the business side, from the community and policy side as well, we need to really start envisioning the classroom in a completely different manner. And what we really need to do is start thinking about, let's take off those restraints. Every one of us here has the luxury of being able to think without the restraints of what educators have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But I think collectively, if we can come together and we can provide support for these educators, we really need to start thinking about those classrooms. Are the classrooms really going to look like what they look like today? Are they going to look futuristic, where students are learning based on their interests, aptitudes, and capitalization of what they want to do in the future? And what are some of those things that we need to be doing collectively to march towards that vision? That's what I would really like to take away from this.
Does anyone have any final words of wisdom or anything they want to add to what Ghazal just charged us all with?
I'll jump in. I think, yeah, no, as I think we think about the kind of the big picture challenge, the dynamic is clearly changing, as we've talked about up through this hour of conversation. And I think we could go another 3 and still have new stuff to talk about. But I kind of taking it back to the concept of the responsibility of the community is, I think we have to set expectations around what we want to come out of this. And we've talked about, we want to critical thinkers, good decision makers. Well, our teachers today don't go through college and get a teacher's education to be that. They get taught essentially to teach curriculum. And so, the dynamic change in how we bring educational opportunities, whether they're experiential or online education or just completely new forms of opportunities to learn, I don't want to lose the perspective of it's going to be the responsibility of the community to make sure that all of those other experiences come together to kind of provide an input to turning out well-rounded students at the end of the conversation. And so, you can bridge this all the way to a conversation of what's the parent's responsibility in the lives of their student, or are they just pushing them off and they're expecting the school to turn out a well-rounded student? Well, let's go beyond the concept of the parent-student, parent-child relationship and think about how can the community embrace that responsibility to provide experiences and opportunities to help students through that journey, because it's more than just the curriculum and education piece, right? It's all the other pieces that, Ghazal, your comment earlier about kind of building that self-confidence in an individual through the leadership opportunity. Those are all things that have to get kind of embedded in this process. So I'm not simplifying things for us. I'm actually making them more difficult. But the reality is, if we're going to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of kind of changing how this whole process works, we got to take a holistic approach. And I think the education, institutional education on its own, corporate entities on their own aren't going to do that. It's the community that sits between it that's going to kind of tie all those pieces together.
And I just wanted to add, we haven't talked about the most vulnerable populations in terms of students. And I'm talking about indigenous communities. I'm talking about children of color, specifically Black and Hispanic communities. I'm talking about Title I schools. I hear Spring Branch. That's great, but that's a privileged school district. Let's just be honest. We need to ensure that we're providing these opportunities for those schools, because those schools are desperate. And a lot of the administrators are more willing to let you come in and, create the change than some of the other more well-to-do, wealthier school districts. They are more focused on, we've got to, meet these process goals, whereas you've got these struggling schools that would allow me to come in and bring in these space gardens, deputize their students, show them how to go through the whole life cycle of the plant, take up hours of their day because they're desperate for that. And we also have to know, John, I love that you brought up parents, because the parents, I've seen that in Fort Bend ISD, they're offering education for parents now because that's needed. The parents oftentimes have a lot of mental health issues, and you have students that come in having a lot of mental health issues. It leads to the bullying. It leads to the anxiety. When a kid can't solve a school problem, all of a sudden they melt down and they have panic attacks. And it is, people are not taught how to produce critical thinking skills. So we have to reteach the educators. And that goes back to what I said about dismantling. But if you have, Melissa, your program, is there a way to bring in kids from those Title I schools, so that they can have those hands-on experiences? Because when I've spoken to Title I schools, I've been shocked sometimes when the first thing they ask me is, how much do you make? And I'm like, that's not really the question, because when they hear how much you would make in a federal government setting, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to, play basketball or go into sports or something that's going into their mind, make millions of dollars. Don't get me wrong. Having to take money off the table as a concern is an awesome thing, and everybody should be able to strive to do that. But we have to teach them that you don't lead with how much you make. You lead with what can you do? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What's going to make you the happiest? And that will in turn make you rich, literally and, otherwise.
Yeah, and I know we just have a little bit of time left, so I'll go quick. But Houston Exponential does have a lot of work to do there. But I would say on the U of H side, similar to like a PALS program where you have a college or a senior mentor paired with a fourth grade student from a Title I school or something like that. U of H has really incredible opportunities for students to get involved with the college students. So I think making those connections and not even just with U of H, but with all colleges, and maybe even pairing students from Spring Branch ISD with the Title I schools. But I really think that the student-on-student mentorship is important. The peer-to-peer mentorship is important to introduce or reintroduce going forward. And I think that's our time, so I'll stop there.
I think this has been such an incredible conversation. Like somebody just mentioned, we could go on for hours and hours and continue having more and more conversation. And I think we should. We should take this as kind of like the stepping stone to start having these conversations and start building these bridges more and more so. And John, as you mentioned, Canon is now expanding and actually taking that footprint over and building those communities in different parts of Texas or even across the United States. Same thing with Houston Exponential. And Dr. Noreen, you're a force on your own, and you're out there in the media and talking about all of this. We need to continue these conversations. So I think my challenge to all of you would be that we stay connected and we continue on part 2 of this conversation in the near future. So thank you everyone for your time. And I really appreciate having all of you here to start having this very important conversation. And we look forward to many more.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.